The $9 billion smile that collapsed overnight. Picture this. It's the week before Christmas. You wake up, grab your phone, and go to check on your ongoing dental treatment, something you've been paying for month after month. But the app doesn't load. The customer support line is dead. The website has been replaced by a cold, clinical FAQ. And somewhere in the fine print, you find out that the lifetime guarantee you were sold the day you signed up, gone. Just like that. No warning, no refund, no one left to answer your calls. This wasn't a scam in the traditional sense. This was the overnight collapse of a company that had once been valued at nearly $9 billion. And the story of how SmileDirectClub went from Silicon Valley darling to absolute catastrophe is one of the most brutal business implosions in recent memory.
To understand how it all fell apart, you have to understand why everyone believed in it in the first place. In 2014, two childhood friends, Alex Frankel and Jordan Katzman, looked at the orthodontics industry and saw something that frustrated millions of people. Braces were expensive. Getting them required multiple specialist visits over months or years. For a huge portion of the population, straight teeth weren't a realistic option, not because they didn't want them, but because the system made it nearly impossible to access. So Frankel and Katzman asked a simple question. What if you could cut all of that out? Instead of sitting in a winding room and writing checks to an orthodontist, you'd either receive a DIY impression kit in the mail or visit one of their sleek retail smile shops for a 3D digital scan. A remote dentist would review your case and approve a treatment plan. Then, a series of custom 3D printed plastic aligners would show up at your front door. Cheaper, faster, no appointments, no gatekeeping. It was the kind of pitch that made investors reach for their checkbooks immediately.
And reach they did. By October 2018, following a major private equity funding round, SmileDirectClub had secured a valuation of $3 billion. That capital went straight into an aggressive expansion strategy that was designed to make the brand impossible to ignore. They struck a landmark deal with CVS Health to open hundreds of smile shops inside pharmacies across the country, making teeth straightening feel as routine and accessible as picking up a prescription. Celebrity endorsements followed. NBA star Draymond Green was attached to the brand ahead of a planned IPO that had the financial world buzzing. The marketing spend was enormous, but that was fine. That's what high-growth tech companies do. You pour money into capturing market share early and worry about profitability later. The company had positioned itself not as a dental business, but as a technology platform that happened to straighten teeth. That framing mattered more than most people realized. Because by the summer of 2019, they were targeting an IPO that would put their valuation at $8.9 billion. And Wall Street was listening. Before the stock even started trading, analysts were talking about this like the next great consumer tech story. It felt inevitable. And then, it wasn't. On September 12th, 2019, SmileDirectClub started trading on the NASDAQ. And within hours, it was a disaster. The stock plunged nearly 28% on its very first day, reportedly the worst debut for a major US IPO since the financial crisis. The public markets had looked past the hype and seen something that private investors, caught up in the excitement, had chosen to overlook. This was not a software company. It had no recurring revenue in the traditional tech sense. It was a business selling physical medical devices with enormous customer acquisition costs, significant regulatory exposure, and a model that depended on a constant flood of new customers just to stay afloat. The comparison to a high-margin tech giant had never really held up, and now, with real money on the line, investors weren't buying it. The applause faded, and what followed was a sustained multi-front assault that the company was never fully equipped to handle. Almost immediately after hitting the public markets, SmileDirectClub found itself in a war. And not just one war. Align Technology, the company behind Invisalign, and once a supply partner and investor in SDC, had become a bitter rival. The two companies were locked in a brutal legal battle that stretched across multiple cases and years. SDC scored some wins, at one point winning a ruling that forced Align to shut down its own retail stores based on non-compete clauses from their previous partnership. But they also absorbed massive blows. One ruling ordered them to pay Align nearly $100 million in a dispute over the value of Align's ownership stake. Another found against them in a supply agreement breach. The legal costs alone were staggering. But even that wasn't the most dangerous fight they were in. State regulators and the established orthodontic community had begun sounding serious alarms about what SmileDirectClub was actually doing to patients. Orthodontists publicly warned that bypassing in-person x-rays and physical exams meant that underlying conditions, gum disease, bone loss, cavities, could go completely undetected and be made dramatically worse by aligner treatment. In California, dental board investigators didn't just file complaints, they raided Smile shops. The company sued the state, calling the raids harassment. A proposed California bill threatened to require x-rays and direct specialist involvement before any aligners could be prescribed remotely. If that legislation passed, it didn't just hurt their business model, it ended it. Their top dentist faced losing his California license entirely. Their stock hit new lows as traders absorbed the scope of the regulatory threat. And things were about to get considerably worse. If the regulatory battles were a slow bleed, the media investigations were a hemorrhage. In January 2020, the New York Times published a report accusing SmileDirectClub of a deeply troubling practice, using non-disclosure agreements to silence unhappy customers. According to the investigation, the company was requiring dissatisfied patients to sign NDAs, agreeing not to post negative reviews anywhere online, including the Better Business Bureau, as a condition of receiving refunds for treatments they were unhappy with. The story opened the floodgates. NBC Nightly News ran a broadcast investigation featuring customers describing serious problems with their treatment: pain, bite misalignment, lasting dental damage. A hidden camera investigation by the CBC in Canada raised additional questions about misleading information being given to potential customers and questionable treatment plans being approved without adequate review. Class action lawsuits began arriving. SDC's legal terms pushed most plaintiffs into arbitration, keeping the cases out of the headlines. But the reputational damage was already done, and the company's response made everything worse. In May 2020, SmileDirectClub sued NBC Universal for $2.85 billion, claiming the broadcast investigation was defamatory and had caused catastrophic financial harm. It was a staggering move from a company already burning through cash and fighting battles on every front. Rather than quieting the criticism, it amplified it. Now, on top of everything else, they were at war with a major television network. The story wasn't going away. It was getting louder. By 2021, even the day-to-day operation of the business was breaking down. In May of that year, SDC disclosed it had been hit by a cybersecurity incident, an attack that disrupted their ability to process orders and ship products at a time when they could least afford any additional chaos. They tried to minimize the long-term significance of the breach, but it added yet another layer of strain onto a system that was already stretched dangerously thin. And then, the macroeconomic environment shifted. Through 2022, inflation surged and recession fears began rippling through consumer spending. Teeth aligners are not a necessity. When people start cutting back, cosmetic dental treatment is one of the first things to go. Demand began to fall at exactly the moment the company needed it most. The financial math had always been brutal. They were spending enormous amounts on sales and marketing just to generate enough revenue to keep the lights on. That dynamic had been bleeding them since before the IPO. Now, with demand dropping and costs mounting from years of legal battles, the situation became critical. The CFO was desperately slashing expenses. The cash reserves were draining fast. They were caught in a trap with no exit. Aggressive spending was the only thing keeping customer volume alive, but that same spending was killing the company, and no one was riding in to save them. On January 29, 2023, SmileDirectClub filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The initial plan was to restructure, reduce the debt load, and find a buyer who could keep some version of the business alive. That plan lasted days. Almost immediately after the filing, the company announced it was shutting down all operations at once and moving to full liquidation. No restructuring, no buyer, no path forward, just closure. The company's homepage was replaced with a stark FAQ page informing customers that the lifetime smile guarantee no longer existed and would not be honored. Customers who were in the middle of active treatment plans were told their aligner shipments had stopped immediately. And in a twist that outraged thousands of people, they were still expected to keep making their monthly payments to the third-party financing company HFD, even though the treatment they were financing had vanished. People were left with unfinished treatments, teeth potentially worse than when they started, and absolutely no one left at the company to contact. A $31.75 million settlement in an antitrust case against Align Technology was eventually approved in late 2025, providing small partial refunds to some affected customers. For most, it was too little, too late. A company that had once promised to democratize dental care had left its most loyal customers in financial and physical limbo.
The collapse of SmileDirectClub is not just a story about a bad investment or a failed IPO. It's a warning about what happens when the Silicon Valley instinct to move fast and break things gets applied to human health. The friction that SDC promised to eliminate, the x-rays, the in-person exams, the specialist oversight, was never just red tape. Regulators and orthodontists weren't being protective of their turf for no reason. That friction existed because teeth and jaws and bone structure are complicated, and getting it wrong has real consequences for real people. Every layer of oversight the company tried to route around eventually came back to stop them. The legal battles drained the cash, the regulatory walls blocked the growth, the media scrutiny shattered the reputation, and the customers, the ones who had believed in the promise of affordable, accessible dental care, were the ones left holding the consequences. $9 billion of confidence reduced to an FAQ page and an unanswered phone line. The smile was always the product. It just turned out the company was selling something it couldn't actually deliver.